The note was written on the back of a takeout menu. It was the only paper she could find in the kitchen, and she did not want to wake him to ask for something better, so she used what was there, a folded paper menu from a Chinese restaurant on Massachusetts Avenue, the kind that accumulated in every Cambridge apartment in 1970, slid under doors and forgotten on counters and never quite thrown away. She wrote on the blank inside panel, in the large, slightly pressured handwriting that people who knew her recognized immediately, and that meant nothing to a stranger. She wrote, "Thanks for not knowing who I was." She left it on the kitchen table under the corner of a coffee mug so it would not slide off. She picked up the small bag she had brought and she let herself quietly out of the apartment, pulling the door shut behind her with the particular care of someone who does not want the click of a latch to become the punctuation mark of a departure. It was early morning in Cambridge, Massachusetts, August 1970. The street outside was empty in the way that city streets are empty only in the very early hours, not abandoned, just paused, holding its breath before the day started. The air smelled of cut grass and something faintly maritime, the particular late summer smell of a New England morning that had no equivalent anywhere she had lived before. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. No one passed, no one looked, no one called her name. She had 2 hours before the car would come. She walked. To understand why the note mattered, it helps to understand what the preceding months had been. The full Tilt Boogie band tour had been running since June, and it had been, by every professional measurement, a success. Sold-out venues, performances that reviewers ran out of adjectives for, an audience that had grown not just in number but in devotion, the particular devotion of people who felt that what they were receiving was something personal, something given specifically to them, even in arenas that held thousands. She was extraordinary on that tour. The people who were there say so with a consistency that goes beyond ordinary praise. They say it the way people describe things that slightly exceeded what they thought was possible. Every night she stood under those lights and did the thing she had always done, which was to open herself completely to whatever the music required and give it without reservation, and every night the audience received it with a hunger that matched her own. But tours are not made only of performances. Tours are made of corridors and loading docks and green rooms that all look the same regardless of what city they are in. The green room in Cincinnati is the green room in Philadelphia, is the green room in Atlanta, the same folding table, the same writer on the counter, the same arrangement of faces waiting for the performer to arrive and become, in person, the thing they already were in everyone's imagination. Tours are made of the hours between sound check and showtime, when there is too much time and nothing to do with it that reaches anything real. The hours have a particular quality, not restful, not productive, a kind of suspended animation that is the opposite of the charged aliveness of the stage. She had learned over the preceding years various ways of occupying those hours. Some of them were better than others. None of them entirely solved the problem. Tours are made of the faces that surround you, managers and musicians and crew members, and the particular category of person who appears in dressing rooms in every city, familiar and nameless, there because proximity to something extraordinary is its own reward. She was not ungrateful for them. She was, by the accounts of the people who traveled with her, genuinely warm toward the people around her, curious about their lives, attentive in the way that surprised people who expected performance to extend into personal interaction. But warmth across a distance is not the same as contact, and the distance, by the summer of 1970, had become a condition of the work rather than a departure from it. She was surrounded, constantly, by people who knew who she was. Not who she was in the private, unperformed sense, not the woman who had grown up in Port Arthur and learned to sing from blues records in a friend's bedroom and come back from San Francisco defeated and tried to stop and found she couldn't. They knew who Janis Joplin was, the cultural fact of her, the voice, the feather boas, the performance of freedom that had become, in the years since Monterey, almost indistinguishable from the person performing it. Being known that way is not the same as being known. She understood this. She had understood it for some time. But understanding something and finding an alternative to it are different problems, and the alternative had been difficult to locate inside the architecture of her life. And then the tour had a gap, 4 days between a show in New York and the next date, 4 days in which the schedule released her, temporarily, from its requirements. She went to Cambridge. There was no particular reason for Cambridge. A musician she knew slightly had mentioned an apartment there, a friend of a friend's place, empty for the summer, available. She had written down the address on a piece of paper that she still had in her jacket pocket, and when the 4 days opened up, she had taken a car from New York and given the driver the address and watched the city give way to highway, give way to the particular landscape of Massachusetts in August, green and slightly overgrown, the light different from California light, softer and more diffuse, as if it had been filtered through something. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building near Harvard Square. It belonged, she had been told, to a graduate student who was spending the summer in Vermont. The key was under the mat. The apartment was small and book-filled and smelled of old paper and someone else's life, and she had stood in the doorway of it for a moment before going in, aware that she was about to inhabit a space that had been shaped entirely by a person who did not know she existed. She slept for 14 hours the first night. When she woke, it was midday and the apartment was full of the particular quality of summer light that comes through windows with white curtains, diffuse, warm, directionless, the kind of light that makes it difficult to feel urgency about anything. She lay still for a while, listening. Someone in the apartment above was moving around, distant traffic, a bicycle bell on the street below, the sounds of a neighborhood conducting its ordinary life with no awareness of or interest in her. She got up and made coffee in a kitchen where she did not know where anything was, and found the process of locating a coffee mug in someone else's. Cabinets briefly, unexpectedly, wonderful, the ordinary problem of a stranger's kitchen, solvable, requiring no particular quality she had been trained to perform. She drank the coffee standing at the window and looked down at Harvard Square. Nobody looked up. The second night was when she met him. His name was Daniel. He lived in the apartment directly below the graduate students, and she encountered him in the stairwell on her way back from buying groceries at a small market around the corner, bread and cheese and a bottle of wine, the simple provisions of someone who intended to eat quietly and alone. He was coming up as she was coming down, and the stairwell was narrow, and they both stopped and moved aside in the slightly awkward way of strangers in close quarters. He was carrying a stack of library books and wearing a jacket despite the August heat, and had the particular distracted look of someone whose thoughts were still partially elsewhere. He said sorry. She said sorry. They both laughed slightly at the simultaneous apology. He did not recognize her. She understood this in the moment it happened with a certainty that required no confirmation. His eyes met hers with the ordinary, neutral attention of a person encountering a stranger, not the slightly different quality of attention, the fractional widening and adjustment that she had learned to recognize as the moment of recognition. He looked at her the way people look at other people in stairwells, like a person, like no one in particular. She felt something release in her chest that she had not known was clenched. They talked for a few minutes in the stairwell. He was writing a dissertation on something she only partially followed. She caught the words American literature and asked one question, and he answered it with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely gets to talk about the thing they are most interested in. She listened with genuine attention, not performed attention, the kind that costs nothing and returns nothing, but real listening, the kind that requires you to actually follow what someone is saying and care about where it is going. She told him she was passing through. She did not say from where or to where or why, and he did not ask. They said good night in the stairwell and went to their respective doors, and she stood in the graduate student's kitchen for a moment afterward, holding the bag of groceries and feeling the specific texture of an ordinary human exchange, brief, uncomplicated, asking nothing from her that she had not freely given. She ate the bread and cheese sitting on the floor of the living room with the wine beside her and the radio on low, a Cambridge station playing jazz, unhurried and conversational, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular quality of being simply present in a room with no requirement to be anything more than that. He knocked on her door the following evening, which she had not expected but found she did not mind. He had made too much pasta, he said, and offered her a bowl with the straightforward matter-of-factness of a person who feeds people the way other people offer a spare umbrella, because it is available and useful, and declining would be unnecessarily formal. She accepted because the offer was genuine, and because she was hungry, and because sitting across a kitchen table from someone who would talk to her about American literature felt, in that specific moment, like exactly the right thing. They ate and talked, and he did not ask what she did, or where she was from, or anything that would require her to locate herself inside the story the world had constructed around her name. He talked about his dissertation. He talked about a novel he was reading. He asked whether she had ever spent time in New England before, and she said not much, and he told her things about Cambridge in summer that you could only know from living there, the specific quality of the light in late August, the way the square changed once the students left, the bakery on a particular street that was worth the walk. She told him small, true things about herself. Things that existed before the career and outside of it, that she had grown up near the Gulf Coast, that she had always read more than people expected, that she was trying to learn to be somewhere. Without needing it to be somewhere else, he listened the way he talked, without agenda, without the slight forward lean of someone looking for the moment to redirect the conversation toward themselves. At some point it became late. The pasta bowls were in the sink and the wine was finished, and neither of them had noticed the time accumulating. When she stood to go upstairs, he said good night in the same ordinary tone as the first time, and she went up the stairwell to the graduate student's apartment and lay in the dark thinking about nothing specific, which was itself specific and unusual and worth paying attention to. She woke very early. The room was still dark, the early August light just beginning to gray the edges of the white curtains. She lay still for a while, the way she often did in the early morning, when the mind is still slow enough to observe itself without immediate interference. She thought about the tour. She thought about the Pearl sessions, which had been extraordinary recordings she understood, even in the making of them, to be among the truest things she had produced. She thought about the months ahead, which were already scheduled in the detailed and unrelenting way that schedules become when a career has reached a certain velocity. She thought about the stairwell, about pasta and American literature, and a person who had looked at her in a narrow hallway with the ordinary neutral attention of someone who did not know and had not been told. She got up quietly and dressed in the dark and went to the kitchen. The mirror in the small bathroom caught her on the way past. She stopped. It was early and the light was low, and she had not yet done any of the things that constituted the version of herself the world recognized. No makeup, no feather boas, no southern comfort, no stage, just the face she had been born with, looking back at her from a stranger's bathroom mirror in the very early morning in a city that did not know she was there. She looked at herself for a long time, not critically, not with the particular scrutiny she sometimes brought to mirrors on tour, checking the performance before it began, making sure the version of Janis Joplin that walked out under the lights was fully assembled, fully present, fully capable of doing what was required of her. That mirror scrutiny was purposeful and slightly anxious, the last checkpoint before the irreversible commitment of stepping on stage. This was different. She was looking without agenda. The way you look at a room you are about to leave, taking an inventory not of what you need to take, but of what the room actually is in itself, before you remove your presence from it. The face in the mirror was tired in the way that a specific and real kind of tired looks, not depleted, not damaged, but honestly worn, the way things look when they have been genuinely used. It was the face of someone who had been giving something large and real away for a long time and had for 2 days been allowed to stop. She thought about Port Arthur. She thought about the girl who had stood in other mirrors in other early mornings, the mirror in the house on Lombardy Street, the mirror in the first San Francisco apartment, all the motel mirrors of the years in between, and how each of those reflections had been a different version of the same ongoing question: what are you, and what are you going to do with it? She did not have a new answer. But the question felt that morning less urgent than it usually did, less like a demand and more like a companion, something that had been with her long enough that its presence was no longer alarming. Then she went to the kitchen and found the takeout menu and wrote the note. She walked for 2 hours through Cambridge in the early morning. No one looked, no one stopped. A man walking a dog nodded at her from across the street, the generic, pleasant nod of a person who lives in a neighborhood and has learned to regard other early risers as members of a loose and unspoken community. She nodded back. She walked along the river. The Charles was still in gray-silver in the early light, a few rowers already out on the water, their oars making small disturbances in the surface that closed behind them immediately. She stood at the railing and watched them for a while. She thought about the note, whether it had been the right thing to say, and whether right was even the relevant category. It was true. He had not known, and she had been grateful, and the gratitude was real enough to deserve acknowledgement, even if the acknowledgement was slightly strange and would probably confuse him. She hoped it would not confuse him too much. She hoped it would read as what it was, a sincere and uncomplicated thank you for something that most people did not understand needed thanking. The rowers disappeared around a bend in the river. The morning was getting lighter. Somewhere behind her, Cambridge was beginning to wake. The car came at 8. She put her bag in the back seat and gave the driver the address of the hotel in New York. The city moved past the windows, the square, the bridge, the high. Opening up toward the south, and she watched it without trying to hold on to it. In October, she would record the last tracks of the Pearl album. In the winter, it would be finished. She would not see the winter. But on the morning in August, in the back of a car moving away from Cambridge, she was not thinking about that. She was thinking about a mirror in a small bathroom and a face that had looked back at her without performance, and the specific and irreplaceable relief of having spent 2 days in a city where the only thing she had been required to be was a woman in a stairwell, carrying groceries, saying sorry at the same moment as a stranger. She had been known for everything else for 4 years. 2 days of not being known had been, it turned out, exactly what she had not known she needed. The highway opened up ahead of the car. The driver had the radio on low, something she didn't recognize, something unremarkable, the ordinary sound of a Tuesday morning in America. She leaned her head against the window and felt the highway moving under her and did not try to make the feeling mean more than it was. It was enough. For 2 days, it had been exactly enough.